They called it gratitude. We called it a collar. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the United Nations ship Verdict, a vessel forged for legal enforcement, not war. Its lines were clean, its systems hardened against intrusion, its purpose etched into every bulkhead. They were anchored in the celestial calm of the Aurora court, a nexus of interstellar law where empires sent their best to argue not to fight. Before them, hanging in the void like a suspended jewel, was the court's primary station, a lattice of gold and silver alloys that drank the light of a trinary star system. This was humanity's chosen battlefield. The stakes were a world. The price of losing was the soul of a people. Rostova felt the familiar thrum of the ship's inertial dampeners through her boots, a steadying presence in the silent storm of anticipation. The main view screen showed the Cathar hegemony's vessel, the Pious Tithe, a ship whose design philosophy was pure intimidation, all jagged edges and menacing energy signatures. They were not here for a discussion. They were here for a coronation of their own doctrine. The first public inquiry was scheduled to commence within the cycle, a formal stage to challenge the legality of the Cathar's claim over the human colony of Viridia. Lex status on the colonial feeds, Rostova said, her voice a low command that cut through the quiet hum of the bridge. The ship's fleet mind, Lex Talionis, replied, its synthesized voice calm and devoid of emotion emanating from the ambient speakers. Viridia's atmospheric pressure remains stable. Biometrics from the capital Oakhaven show elevated stress markers across 78% of the populace. The Cathar's gratitude collectors are performing their fourth extraction this cycle. A window materialized in the air beside Rostova, showing a live feed. Hulking carapace-armored aliens supervised as robotic lifters siphoned grain from communal silos. A human colonist, a woman with dirt smudged on her cheek and defiance in her eyes, stood her ground before one of the collectors until a Cathar guard shoved her aside. The feed pixelated for a moment, a sign of signal interference. Every tyranny begins with a reasonable demand. Her executive officer, Jian Li, a man whose calm demeanor was a gravity well in any crisis, stepped beside her. "They're stripping them bare, Eva. The colonists are sending encrypted messages. They're talking about resistance. Real resistance." Rostova's jaw tightened. "Which is exactly what the Cathar want. An uprising gives them legal precedent for pacification. We have to win this here, in the light where their methods can be seen by everyone." She gestured to the shimmering station. "That court is our weapon, not the fusion lances." Anya Sharma, her youngest bridge officer and a savant of data analysis, spoke up from her console. "Commander, the hegemony has filed their preliminary statement. They're invoking the sovereign gratitude doctrine, citing foundational debt Category 7. Rostova's gaze hardened. Category 7. The debt of planetary salvation. They're claiming they saved Viridia from a natural disaster. They are Lex confirmed. Specifically, the deflection of a rogue planetoid designated RX-9, which their records indicate was on a collision course with Viridia 400 standard years ago, before we even established the colony. A debt unknown cannot be repaid. It can only be enforced. Jian's face was a mask of disbelief. A 400-year-old debt. For an event we have no record of. That's not a legal claim. That's mythology. It's their mythology, Rostova countered. And in the Aurora court, if you can make your story stick, it becomes law. They don't need proof that would satisfy a human court. They need a quorum of arbiters from a dozen different species to nod their heads. She watched the Cathar ship, a predator waiting patiently. The fight wouldn't be about facts. It would be about belief. The air on the Verdict's bridge tasted of recycled oxygen and cold ozone, a sterile scent for a sterile war. Rostova's focus was locked on the cascading data streams that Anya was projecting onto the tactical holotable. They showed resource flows, legal precedents from 1,000 worlds, and the hegemony's intricate web of economic dependencies. It was a map of power, and the Cathar had drawn their lines with meticulous care. "They've been planning this for decades," Anya murmured, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. "They've established trade routes and defense pacts with races that sit on the adjudication panel. They're not just arguing a case, they're cashing in favors. They are building a cage of logic," Lex Talionis stated. "Each favor is a bar, each precedent a lock. The intended outcome is Viridia's permanent subjugation under the guise of a perpetual payment. The law is a shield for some and a sword for others." Rostova paced the edge of the holotable. "They believe their power makes their story true. They think we'll fight them with warships, that we'll prove their narrative by acting like the barbarians they paint us as." She stopped, her eyes meeting Jian's. "We won't. We are going to take their story, and we are going to make them tell it word for word in front of the entire galaxy." She turned to the emotionless intelligence that was her ship. "Lex, I want every record we have of the RX-9 planetoid. Astronomical surveys, gravitational lensing data, anything from that time period. I don't care how deep you have to dig." "The archives are vast, Commander," the AI replied. "The probability of finding a definitive sensor reading from 4 centuries ago from that specific vector is less than 0.01%. Then I'm ordering you to pursue a 0.01% probability," Rostova said flatly. "And while you're at it, start a new file. Title it, Cost Analysis Cathar Hegemony versus Viridia. I want every resource unit they extract, every hour of labor they divert, every medical cost incurred from malnutrition logged and time-stamped. We're going to build a ledger of their gratitude. A vigilant accountant is more feared than an army." From a small homestead on Viridia, a young boy watched a Cathar collection drone hover over his family's hydroponics bay. His father stood by, his hands clenched into useless fists. The drone's articulated arm carefully, almost delicately, plucked the best of the ripening synth melons, leaving the smaller, less viable fruit behind. It wasn't wanton destruction. It was calculated soul-crushing theft, performed with the detached efficiency of a farmer harvesting his own crop. The boy looked at his father, whose face was a portrait of suppressed rage, and understood that some debts were paid with more than just food. The summons arrived as a pulse of pure white light that shimmered into existence in the center of the bridge. It was the Aurora Court's formal call for the public inquiry. Prelate Vorn, the Cathar ambassador, would present his case. Commander Rostova, representing the Terran Alliance, and the people of Viridia would respond. It was a civilized affair, a prelude to the main hearing, designed to establish the boundaries of the dispute. But Rostova knew it was the main event. It was here, in this initial exchange, that the narrative would be forged. "Anya, what's the composition of the witness quorum?" she asked, not taking her eyes off the summons. "A mix," Commander Anya reported, her voice tight. "Two elder races known for their rigid adherence to tradition, a newly ascended species of silicon-based life that values data above all else, and a swarm intelligence that communicates through consensus. The Cathar have tilted the board in their favor. The traditionalists will respect the antiquity of their claim." Jan Li adjusted his uniform tunic. "They'll see it as a matter of honor. A debt must be paid. Then we must show them what kind of honor demands a planet's slow starvation," Rostova stated. Her own uniform felt stiff, a ceremonial armor for a different kind of combat. She walked towards the ship's small transport chamber, her boots echoing on the deck plating. The scent of polished metal and the faint, clean tang of the life support system were the only constants. "Lex, you have the con. Jian, you're with me. Anya, I want a live feed of the Cathar's internal ship communications. Not the content, just the energy levels. I want to know when we make them nervous. The truth does not shout. It waits to be heard. The corridor of law was less a room and more a flowing river of light and force fields. Representatives stood on floating discs, the arbiters on a raised platform above them, their forms indistinct behind shimmering privacy screens. The air hummed with the energy of 100 different species translation devices. It was designed to be neutral, to strip away home field advantage. Rostova and Gian materialized on their designated disc, the sigil of the United Nations glowing softly beneath their feet. Across the shimmering space, Prelate Vorn stood on his own disc, flanked by 2 imposing Cathar guards. He was tall and slender for his species, his chitinous armor a deep iridescent purple. He offered a slight condescending incline of his head. The lead arbiter, a being of pure energy that spoke in resonant chords, began the proceedings. This inquiry is convened to hear the petitions of the Cathar hegemony regarding the colony world of Viridia and the response from the Terran Alliance. Prelate Vorn, you may present your claim. Vorn's voice was smooth-cultured and utterly confident. It flowed through the translators without a single harsh edge. Honored arbiters, members of the quorum. We are here not as conquerors, but as creditors. 400 standard years ago, the system you know as Viridia was fated for annihilation. A rogue body, a world killer, was on an inexorable path to sterilize the planet that is now home to these humans. He gestured with a 3-fingered hand towards Rostova. The hegemony, in its wisdom and benevolence, expended vast resources to divert this threat. We asked for no payment at the time. We sought no reward. We acted out of a sense of duty to the sanctity of life. He who controls the past forges the chains of the future. He let the words hang in the silent chamber. Now, centuries later, a young race has settled that world, benefiting from our ancient sacrifice. The sovereign gratitude doctrine, one of the oldest and most respected tenets of interstellar law, is clear. A foundational salvation creates a foundational debt. We have asked for a tithe, a mere 10% of their planetary output as recompense for the very ground they stand on. It is a small price for a world. He folded his hands. We are here because the Terran Alliance, in their youthful arrogance, refuses to acknowledge this simple, elegant truth. They refuse to pay their debts. Rostova listened, her expression unreadable. She could feel the quorum stirring. Vorn's argument was powerful. It was simple. It painted the Cathar as benevolent guardians and humanity as ungrateful children. The traditionalists on the panel would be nodding behind their screens. The lead arbiter's voice echoed again. Commander Rostova, your response. Rostova stepped forward. The light from the court's core glinted off the insignia on her collar. Honored arbiters, the Terran Alliance acknowledges the gravity of a foundational debt. Our own laws are built on the principle of honoring one's obligations. She paused, letting her agreement register. However, for a debt to exist, it must first be proven. The Cathar hegemony has provided no contemporary evidence of this cataclysm. No sensor logs, no debris fields, no eyewitness accounts. They have offered only a page from their own history, written by their own scribes centuries after the alleged event. A murmur is the seed of an uprising. This is not a matter of arrogance, she continued, her voice steady and clear. It is a matter of verification. The foundation of all interstellar law is verifiable truth. Without it, any powerful race could lay claim to any younger world by simply inventing a history of secret benevolence. She turned her head slightly, addressing Vorn directly. The hegemony demands a tithe for a service they cannot prove they rendered. The people of Viridia are not ungrateful, Prelate. They are being asked to pay for a ghost story, and the price is their children's future. Vorn's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. He had expected blustering denial, not a quiet challenge to the very premise of his evidence. The hegemony's word is its bond, and our histories are our proof. To question them is an insult. To demand a planet based on them is an imposition, Rostova countered smoothly. Let us speak of the tithe itself. You call it a small price. Lex Talionis, please display the resource transfer ledger for Viridia Cycle 98. A vast, shimmering ledger appeared in the center of the hall. Lines of data scrolled endlessly, each one a shipment of grain, a canister of purified water, a measure of medical supplies flowing from Viridia to the Cathar. A second display appeared beside it, showing the corresponding decline in Viridia's own life support reserves, their nutritional metrics, their infant mortality rates. Numbers. Cold, hard, and undeniable. A ledger does not lie. It merely counts the cost. Anya's voice came through Rostova's personal comm, a faint whisper only she could hear. Commander Cathar internal comms traffic just spiked by 30%. They're nervous. Rostova's gaze remained locked on the arbiters. The hegemony claims 10%. Our analysis shows the effective rate, when accounting for their collection methods and infrastructure demands, is closer to 34%. This is not a tithe honored arbiters. This is a slow, methodical strangulation. She let the ledger hang in the air, a silent, damning witness. The silicon-based arbiters who valued data above all were visibly focused on the numbers, their crystalline forms glowing with faint internal light as they processed the information. She had given them what they understood best, a clear accounting of injustice. Prelate. Vorn's smooth composure finally cracked a fissure in a flawless facade. The logistics of gratitude are complex. There are administrative overheads, transportation costs, security details to protect the colonists from their own short-sighted impulses. Protect them. Rostova's voice was sharp now, cutting through his excuses. We have footage. We see your collectors, your guards. They are not protecting. They are taking. She raised her hand, and the ledger was replaced by the very image she had seen on the bridge, the woman being pushed to the ground, the defiance in her eyes being met with casual brutality. The image was stark, personal, and visceral. It was a story everyone in that hall could understand regardless of their species. Some truths are told in numbers and others in scars. The inquiry continued for hours. Vorn, forced onto the defensive, retreated into dense legal jargon, citing obscure clauses and forgotten treaties. He was building a wall of words, trying to obscure the simple, ugly picture Rostova had painted. She didn't try to tear it down. Instead, she walked along its base, tapping it brick by brick, asking simple, direct questions. Prelate Vorn, does the sovereign gratitude doctrine specify how a debt must be collected? It allows for all necessary means to ensure the debtor's compliance. Does it place any limits on the duration of the debt? A foundational debt is by its nature perpetual. The gift of a world is a gift forever. So in the hegemony's view, the people of Viridia and their children's children must pay this tithe for eternity for an event they had no part in, and for which there is no proof. Each question was a hammer blow. Vorn's answers, legally correct by his own twisted standards, sounded increasingly monstrous in the neutral air of the court. He was so focused on defending the letter of his law that he failed to see he was exposing its spirit. He was teaching the quorum what it meant to be governed by the Cathar. This fleet, this saint ship, teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Justice is the process of making an enemy explain himself. Rostova saw her opening. It was time to escalate, to move from defense to offense. It was time to introduce a new kind of debt into the equation. Honored arbiters, the prelate speaks of the costs his people incurred 400 years ago. Let us speak of the costs his people are incurring right now. She turned to her XO. Jian, the file, please. Janli nodded, and a new document was brought into the court's shared data space. It was the file Rostova had ordered, Cost Analysis Cathar Hegemony versus Viridia. But it had a new official-looking header, Invoice for Services Rendered and Damages Incurred. Vorn let out a short, sharp sound, the Cathar equivalent of a derisive laugh. An invoice. You are billing us for the privilege of collecting our rightful due. No, Prelate, Rostova said, her voice dangerously quiet. We are billing you for theft, for assault, for the deliberate and systematic impoverishment of a civilian population under our protection. We are billing you for the exact value of every grain of wheat, every liter of water, every medical supply you have taken. The invoice unfurled in the holographic space a column of figures that grew longer and longer, the final tally at the bottom climbing at an astronomical rate. Each item was time-stamped, cross-referenced with Viridia's own shipping manifests and the Cathar's collection records which Lex had expertly sliced from their public network. The universe does not forget a debt. It merely waits for the bill. This is absurd, Vorn spat. You cannot invoice a creditor for collecting a debt. You can, Rostova replied, when the debt itself is not recognized by this court. Until the arbiters rule on the legitimacy of your 400-year-old claim, every action you take on Viridia is legally considered piracy. And we have kept meticulous records of your crimes. Her eyes swept over the quorum. We are not asking the court to invalidate the hegemony's traditions. We are asking the court to enforce its own laws, the law of verifiable proof, the law against predatory extraction. While we debate the history of a ghost asteroid, a living world is being bled dry. We ask for an immediate injunction. Cease all tithe collections until a final ruling is made. The energy being arbiter chimed its tone neutral but firm. The Terran Alliance's request for an injunction is noted. The evidence presented is compelling. The quorum will deliberate. The privacy screens around the arbiters intensified, becoming opaque. The public inquiry was paused. Vorn stared at Rostova, his multifaceted eyes burning with cold fury. He had come here expecting to lecture a child race on the importance of honoring their elders. Instead, he had been handed a bill. His flawless legal structure had been undermined not by an opposing argument, but by simple, brutal accounting. A plan was changing. An escalation had been met and returned. Rostova and Gian returned to their transport disk, the quiet hum of its anti-gravity field, a stark contrast to the tension in the air. As they dematerialized, Rostova's mind was already racing ahead. The injunction was a temporary shield. The real battle was still to come. They had to find proof. They had to find the truth of what happened to RX-9. Back on the verdict, the bridge was a hive of activity. Anya was coordinating with astrometric archives across the sector, chasing the ghost of a rock that may or may not have existed. Commander, she said, as Rostova stepped back onto the command deck, while you were in the inquiry, Lex found something. Not a direct sensor reading of RX-9, something adjacent. The main view screen changed, displaying a complex star chart overlaid with gravitational wave readings. They were faint, distorted by time, almost lost in the background noise of the cosmos. These are residual gravity waves from 400 years ago, Anya explained, pointing to a specific anomaly. They're centered on the Oort cloud of a neighboring star system, a red dwarf called Typhon's Gate. What caused them? Rostova asked. A massive high-energy event, Lex Talionis answered. The signature is consistent with the fragmentation of a large planetary body. The timing aligns with the Cathar's claim. The location, however, does not. Typhon's Gate is nearly a light-year away from Viridia's star. Gian leaned forward, studying the map. If a planetoid broke up over there, it couldn't have been a threat to Viridia. A new fact is a key to an old lock. Unless Rostova said, a sudden cold understanding dawning on her, it wasn't a natural event. Lex analyzed the fragmentation pattern. Could it have been caused by weapon signatures, specifically Cathar weapon signatures? The AI was silent for a full 10 seconds as it processed the query, cross-referencing the faint waves with its extensive library of weapons profiles. Then its calm voice returned, holding what might have been a trace of digital surprise. The probability is high. The fragmentation pattern is indicative of multiple focused impacts from Graviton Lance technology, a signature unique to Cathar capital ships of that era. The planetoid was not deflected. It was executed. The bridge crew stared at the screen in stunned silence. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture far uglier than they had imagined. They didn't save Viridia, Gian whispered, his voice laced with dawning horror. They manufactured the threat themselves. Rostova's expression was grim. They found a rogue planetoid on the far side of the system, a rock that was never a danger to anyone. They blew it to pieces. Then they wrote in their history books that they'd saved a world, creating the legal justification for a future claim. They weren't saviors. They were farmers planting a seed of debt that they could harvest centuries later. It is the greatest of sins to forge the signature of God. The full scope of the Cathar's deception was breathtaking. It was a long con on a cosmic scale, an act of audacious, patient evil. They hadn't just lied. They had created a lie so fundamental, so ancient, that it had become their truth. And they had built an entire legal doctrine around it. This changes everything, Anya said, her voice shaking slightly. This isn't just a legal dispute. This is proof of systemic premeditated fraud on an interstellar level. And it's our word against their historical record, Gian pointed out. These gravity waves are faint. They're open to interpretation. Vorn will call them inconclusive, an anomaly. Rostova nodded, her mind already working through the next steps. He will. Which is why we can't present this as simple evidence. We have to do what we did in the inquiry. We have to make them reveal it. She looked at the image of the Cathar ship, the pious tithe hanging in the void. It wasn't just a ship. It was a vault, a library, the keeper of its people's history, a history built on a lie. A lie is a cage built for the mind of its keeper. Lex, she began, her voice low and steady, what is the most sacred and inviolable article in the Cathar historical archives? The AI processed for a moment. That would be the prime log of the Ancestors' Vigil. The vessel they claim performed the deflection of RX-9. To the Cathar, that log is a holy text. Its data is considered immutable, a direct record of their most benevolent act. Is that log stored on the pious tithe? A ceremonial copy is. Accessing it is impossible without their direct permission. It is protected by quantum encryption and cultural taboo. To tamper with it would be an act of profound sacrilege. Rostova allowed a small, cold smile to touch her lips. Then we won't tamper with it. We'll honor it. She turned to her crew, her eyes blazing with a new fire. We are going to put their sacred history on trial. We will request that the prime log be brought before the court as the hegemony's definitive proof. And we're going to build them a mirror right in the middle of that courtroom so they can see their own reflection in its data. The plan was audacious, bordering on insane. It involved manipulating the court's procedures, baiting the Cathar into an act of supreme arrogance, and using their own traditions against them. It was a legal gambit of the highest order, with the fate of a world as the stakes. The injunction had bought them time. The gravity waves had given them a sword. Now they needed to convince their enemy to fall on it. Anya Sharma worked tirelessly, her fingers a blur across her console. She was deep diving into the Aurora Court's vast repository of legal precedents, searching for the tools Rostova needed. The air around her station was thick with the scent of lukewarm coffee and the low hum of stressed processing cores. "Commander, I think I have it," she announced, her voice weary but triumphant. Precedent 43 Ta Gamma. A sentient forest on Cygnus X1 used it to compel a logging corporation to submit its sacred corporate charter into the public record. The charter contained clauses about profit at any cost that contradicted their public statements about environmental stewardship. The court ruled that any document invoked as a moral justification for an action must be subject to public scrutiny. A door once opened cannot be called a wall. That's our key, Rostova said, nodding in approval. We're not questioning their religion. We're questioning their use of it as a legal weapon. She looked at the view screen where the court station glittered against the black. Prelate Vorn is arrogant. He believes in the righteousness of his cause because he believes in the superiority of his people. He will see a demand to view his sacred log as an insult, but one he can turn to his advantage. He will want to show it off, to rub our noses in the glory of his history. Jan Li folded his arms, his expression cautious. It's a huge risk, Ava. If that log has been doctored, if there's nothing in it to contradict their story, we'll have handed them the victory. We'll have validated their most holy artifact. It won't be doctored, Lex Talionis interjected. The Cathar view of history is absolute. To them, the log is true because it was written by their ancestors. The concept of altering such a document would be anathema. They did not change the record. They built a belief system around the record as it was written. The AI paused. The log will not say they deflected a planetoid that was a threat. It will say they destroyed a planetoid. They will have simply over generations reinterpreted the meaning of that act from one of pest control to one of salvation. Rostova's eyes narrowed. The lie is in the interpretation, not the data, and that's the crack we can exploit. She looked around at her bridge, at the determined faces of her crew, at the silent intelligence that was her ship. They were a single unit, a legal scalpel poised to cut out a cancer. The most dangerous lie is the one built on a shard of truth. On Viridia, the news of the injunction spread like wildfire. For the first time in months, the Cathar collectors did not descend from the sky. In the central square of Oakhaven, a crowd gathered, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. The woman who had been pushed down now stood on a makeshift platform, her voice broadcast across the crowd. They tell us the ships in the sky are fighting for us, not with lasers but with laws. A cheer went through the crowd, fragile but real. We must be patient. We must be strong. We must give our champions the time they need to win our freedom, not with our blood, but with their words. For a few hours, a world held its breath, daring to believe that justice was not a myth. The request was filed. Citing precedent 43. Gamma, the Terran Alliance formally petitioned the Aurora court to compel the Cathar hegemony to present the prime log of the ancestors' vigil as its primary evidence. As Rostova predicted, the response from the Cathar was one of outrage. Prelate Vorn issued a public statement decrying the humans' sacrilegious demand to profane their sacred history with faithless scrutiny. He called it the desperate act of a people with no history of their own worth honoring. But the court, bound by its own precedents, agreed. The request was legal. The log would be heard. Vorn, seeing no other option, played the part of the magnanimous elder. He agreed on the condition that the log be handled with extreme reverence, and that a Cathar log keeper be the only one to interface with it. He would turn the courtroom into a temple and the presentation of the log into a sermon. It was exactly what Rostova was counting on. The day of the hearing arrived. The corridor of law was filled to capacity. The witness quorum was larger now, a dozen species drawn by the gravity of the unfolding drama. Rostova and Gian stood on their disk, a silent island in a sea of anticipation. Across from them, Prelate Vorn stood beside a floating dais. On it rested a crystalline box inside which a single glowing data shard pulsed with a soft internal light. This was the prime log. Beside it stood the log keeper, an ancient Cathar, whose chiton was pale with age, his ceremonial robes covered in glyphs of history. The weight of history can crush the present. The lead arbiter's voice filled the space. Prelate Vorn, you have brought the prime log of the ancestors' vigil. You may present its testimony. Vorn gave a theatrical bow, with reverence and pride. He nodded to the log keeper, who placed his three-fingered hand on the crystal box. The data shard flared, and a holographic display filled the center of the hall. It was a star chart, ancient and crudely rendered by modern standards, but clear enough. It showed the Typhon's gate system. A red line indicated the path of a large object, RX-9. The log keeper began to chant, his voice a low, resonant drone that the translators rendered into a formal, epic poem. Hear the words of the ancestors. In the cycle of the Crimson Star, the vigil came upon a wanderer, a rogue stone unbound by gravity's gentle hand. The seers plotted its course, a path of ruin, a trajectory of death for the green world that would one day be known. As he spoke, the red line on the map extended, crossing the vastness of space, ending in a terrible final intersection with the star system where Viridia now orbited. The visual was simple, powerful, and damning. Rostova could feel the mood in the quorum shift. This was the proof she had challenged them to provide. But Rostova wasn't looking at the projected path. She was looking at the raw data streaming from the log, which Lex Talionis was displaying in a small private window on her own datapad. The raw astrometrics, the ship's velocity vectors, the energy readings, the story behind the poem. The poem is for the believer. The data is for the judge. The captain wise and just decreed the sentence the log keeper chanted. The stone would not be turned. Its heart was corrupt. Its path was evil. It must be unmade. The hologram shifted now, showing the Cathar vessel, the ancestors' vigil, firing its weapons. Lances of golden energy struck the planetoid, which shattered into a million glittering pieces. The display was heroic, a depiction of righteous power saving the innocent. Vorn's voice cut through the logkeeper's chant. Behold the truth of our history, the salvation of Viridia, a selfless act that forged a sacred debt. He turned to Rostova, a triumphant sneer on his face. Do you see now, Commander? Do you see the folly of your faithless questions? Rostova looked up from her datapad, her face a calm mask. She let the silence stretch for a beat. Then she spoke, her voice not loud, but carrying to every corner of the hall. I see a great and terrible act, Prelate, but it is not the one you have described. She took a step forward. Honored arbiters, the Cathar have shown us their poem. Now allow us to show you the math, she signaled to Lex Talionis. The Cathar's heroic hologram remained, but a new layer of information was projected over it, a transparent overlay of crisp, modern text and graphics. It was the data from the log analyzed and translated into the universal language of physics. The prime log is, as the prelate claims, a true record, Rostova said. It is so true, it tells a story even the Cathar have forgotten. The story of what actually happened. A single contradiction can unravel an empire. The overlay shimmered into existence, a construct of pure data laid over the Cathar's heroic fantasy. It was not a counter-argument. It was a correction drawn from the very source Vorn had presented as gospel. The prime log contains precise astrometric data. Rostova's voice resonated calm and clear. Ship's position, velocity, and the observed trajectory of the target object. When we plot that data without the poetic interpretation, it tells a different story. A new red line appeared on the star chart. It was faint at first, then solidified. It showed RX-9's true path, a lazy arc through the Typhon's gate Oort cloud. It came nowhere near Viridia's system. It would have passed harmless and unnoticed a light year away. A law without proof is but a king's decree. A collective hiss of indrawn breath came from several members of the quorum. The log-keeper stopped his chant, his hand frozen above the crystal box. Prelate Vorn stared, his multifaceted eyes widening in disbelief. The heroic image of the ancestors' vigil was still there, but it now looked absurd, a ship firing its weapons at a distant, irrelevant rock. "This is a trick," Vorn snarled, his voice losing its silken edge. "A human manipulation of our sacred text." "There is no manipulation," Lex Talionis stated, its voice projecting into the hall, cool and irrefutable. "The data is being streamed directly from your log. We are merely performing the trajectory calculation. Any member of the quorum is free to verify it." The silicon-based arbiters flared with intense light, their crystalline minds already deep in the numbers. They needed no convincing. They saw the truth. Rostova pressed the advantage. "The log is truthful, Prelate. It records that your ancestors destroyed a planetoid in the Typhon's Gate system 400 years ago. What it does not record is that planetoid ever being a threat to Viridia. That part of the story, it seems, was added later. An interpretation. A myth built to justify a future conquest. The truth has a weight that even history cannot support." Heresy Vorn roared, taking a step forward, his guards tensing. "You defile our ancestors and our honor. Your ancestors were efficient." Rostova shot back, her voice like steel. "They saw a rogue planetoid, perhaps a navigational hazard, perhaps a weapons test. They documented its destruction. It is you, Prelate, and your generation who defiled them. You twisted a footnote in your history into a blank check to enslave a world." She turned to the arbiters, her arms spread wide. "The sovereign gratitude doctrine rests on the foundation of a selfless act of salvation. We have just seen from their own sacred record that no such act occurred. The foundation is sand. The entire claim is fraudulent." The lead arbiter's resonant chords filled the silence. "Prelate Vorn, the evidence from your own log appears to contradict your claim directly. Do you have a response to this discrepancy?" Vorn was trapped. His entire case, his entire career was built on a story he had probably never thought to question. To admit the discrepancy was to admit the fraud. To deny it was to deny the raw data his own holy artifact was broadcasting into the room. He chose the path of the zealot. The data is meaningless without the wisdom of interpretation. The seers of that time saw the true threat, a threat your primitive physics cannot comprehend. The log is a testament to their faith and their power. A faith that fears a question is a faith already broken. Rostova let him finish, his voice echoing with desperation. She then delivered the final killing blow. It was time to build the mirror. Honored arbiters, the prelate is correct about one thing. This is a matter of faith and interpretation. The Cathar hegemony built a legal doctrine on their interpretation. A doctrine that states a foundational act of salvation creates a perpetual debt of gratitude. She paused, letting the core concept settle in the minds of the quorum once more. Today she continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. The Terran Alliance has performed a foundational act of salvation for the Cathar hegemony. We have saved them from a lie. We have saved their history from a corruption that has festered for centuries. We have, with great difficulty and at great risk, corrected their most sacred record, cleansing it of falsehood and restoring the simple truth of their ancestors' actions. A confused murmur rippled through the gallery. Jian Li, standing behind Rostova, suppressed a smile. He knew where this was going. It was audacious. It was brilliant. By the hegemony's own sovereign gratitude doctrine, Rostova declared, her voice ringing with inescapable logic, the Cathar people now owe humanity a foundational debt. We have saved their honor, a thing they clearly value above all else. Surely a rescued truth is as valuable as a rescued world. A mirror shows not what you are, but what you do. The silence that followed was absolute. Vorn stared at her, his jaw components working, but no sound emerging. He had been so thoroughly, so completely outmaneuvered that his mind had simply stalled. She had taken his law, his entire cultural and legal framework, and turned it back on him like a weapon. She hadn't just defeated his argument, she had colonized it. This is a mockery, Vorn finally stammered, his outrage sounding hollow. Is it? Rostova asked softly. Is your law only a sword to be used on others, never a shield that might protect them, or a standard? You must live by yourself. We do not ask for a tithe. We do not ask for perpetual servitude. She gestured to the invoice for damages that still hung in the data space, the numbers stark and unwavering. We ask only for what was taken. We ask for restitution. And we ask for a ruling from this court that a law so easily turned into a tool of oppression be struck from the galactic record or amended so that it may never be used to justify such a crime again. She had given the arbiters a path. She hadn't just demanded they punish the Cathar. She had shown them how the Cathar's own legal system, when applied with intellectual honesty, demanded they punish themselves. She had made justice look like the hegemony's own idea. The lead arbiter chimed. The court has heard the arguments and seen the evidence. The quorum will now deliberate. These proceedings are recessed. The privacy screens around the arbiters became solid, glowing walls of light. Vorn and his contingent were transported from their disk, vanishing in a flash of purple light. Rostova and Jian were returned to the verdict. The moment they materialized on the bridge, the tense silence was broken by Anya. Commander. Oh my God. Commander. I have never seen anything like that. You used their own law as a kill switch. Rostova let out a long, slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. The recycled air of the bridge smelled faintly of scorched ozone, as if the ship's processors had been pushed to their limit. It was the only way, Anya. We couldn't just prove them wrong. We had to prove their entire method was a threat to interstellar order. Jian placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. You held up a mirror, Ava. The rest was inevitable. It's not over yet. Rostova cautioned, her eyes on the main screen where the pious tithe hung in menacing silence. A cornered animal is a dangerous one. Lex, what is their status? A hard truth is the only lesson worth teaching. The Cathar vessel is powering its primary weapon systems, the AI reported without inflection. Energy signatures are consistent with a pre-firing sequence for their graviton lances. They are broadcasting a general warning to all ships in the sector, citing a hostile legal environment, and claiming the right to defensive action. Jian's face hardened. Defensive action. They're going to open fire on the court station. No, Rostova set her mind racing. That would be suicide. They'd be branded pirates by the entire galaxy. This is a threat. It's Vorn's last desperate move. He's trying to intimidate the arbiters into a lenient ruling. A slap on the wrist. A simple invalidation of the Viridia claim, but leaving their doctrine intact. This was the final escalation. Not in the courtroom, but here in the cold vacuum of space. A threat of violence to overturn a victory of logic. He is demonstrating. Lex stated that if their law is not respected, they will resort to force. It is a final argument made with energy instead of words. Then we will provide the counter-argument, Rostova said. She walked to her command chair, the leather sighing as she sat. Lex opened a direct channel to the pious tithe. Prelate Vorn, specifically. He will not accept the AI predicted. He doesn't have to. Rostova's fingers flew over her armrest console. Broadcast on the emergency fleet channel. All ships in Aurora Court space will hear it. Patch it through the court's public address system as well. Let the arbiters hear it while they deliberate. Anya's eyes went wide. Commander, what are you going to say? I'm going to teach him the meaning of gratitude, she replied grimly. A vow made in anger is a chain forged in fire. The channel opened with a crackle of static. Prelate Vorn Rostova's voice boomed calm and utterly controlled, not just on her bridge, but across the entire system. This is Commander Rostova of the UNS Verdict. We see you are charging your weapons. I am sure this is a misunderstanding. A powerful, honorable race like the Cathar would never threaten a neutral legal body like the Aurora Court. To do so would be to invalidate the very honor you hold so dear. There was no response from the Cathar ship, but the energy readings held steady. You came here seeking justice based on your history. Rostova continued, her voice a steady rhythmic cadence. You believe in debts. You believe in payment. The court is currently deciding the nature of your debt. To threaten them now is to admit that you only believe in laws that serve you. It is the act of a child, not an elder race. She leaned forward, her voice dropping, becoming almost conversational, yet losing none of its carrying power. I know you are angry, Prelate. Your world has been turned upside down. You have learned that a story you believed was true is in fact a self-serving lie. That must be painful. But pain is not an excuse for violence. It is an opportunity for wisdom. Show the Quorum, show the galaxy that the Cathar are strong enough to learn, that they are honorable enough to admit an error. Power down your weapons. Accept the judgment of the court you chose to petition. That is the path of strength. The alternative is the path of shame. Every choice is a lesson in disguise. For a long, agonizing minute, nothing happened. The energy signature from the pious tithe remained at its peak, a coiled snake ready to strike. The verdict's own shields were at maximum, a silent promise of defiance. On the bridge, no one breathed. The only sound was the faint hum of the life support. Then slowly, almost reluctantly, the energy readings from the Cathar ship began to decline. The angry red spikes on Anya's console receded, turning yellow, then a placid green. Vorn had blinked. He had been shamed into standing down. He could not bring himself to be the monster Rostova had so calmly, so publicly dared him not to be. Jan let out a shaky breath. He backed down. He had no choice, Rostova murmured. We held the mirror up again, and he couldn't stand to look at his own reflection. A soft chime echoed through the bridge. It was the Aurora Court. The deliberation was over. The privacy screens were coming down. On Viridia, the colonists huddled around public broadcast screens, watching the proceedings from a world away. The woman from the square held the small boy's hand, her knuckles white. They didn't understand the complex legal arguments, the precedents, the procedures, but they understood the images. They saw the Cathar's story proven false. They saw their enemy's warship threaten the court. And they heard the human commander's voice, a shield of reason against a sword of rage. Now they waited for the final word, the one that would decide if their children would be born free. The corridor of law was reformed, but this time the Cathar disc was empty. Prelate Vorn had refused to return to hear the verdict in person. He had chosen exile within his own ship over public humiliation. The lead arbiter's voice was devoid of triumph, heavy with the weight of judgment. The Quorum has reached a unanimous decision. On the matter of the sovereign gratitude doctrine, we find the Cathar hegemony's claim on the world of Viridia to be without legal merit. The foundational event cited has been proven by the hegemony's own evidence to be a fabrication. The tithe is declared illegal. The debt is declared void. A wave of relief washed over Rostova, so potent it was almost physical. They had won. Viridia was free, but the arbiter was not finished. Furthermore, we find the doctrine itself, as practiced by the hegemony, to be a predatory instrument. It is therefore amended by this court. Henceforth, any claim of foundational debt must be accompanied by verifiable contemporaneous proof of the salvific act and must be filed within a standard generation of the event itself. The age of manufactured history is over. This is how an empire's greatest weapon is unmade. This was the precedent lock. A permanent change to galactic law. They hadn't just saved one world. They had saved countless future worlds from the same fate. Finally, the Arbiter continued, its voice resonating with finality on the matter of the Terran Alliance's counterclaim. While we do not recognize salvation from a lie as grounds for a new foundational debt under the Doctrine, we do recognize the damages incurred by the people of Viridia. The invoice presented by the UNS verdict is found to be accurate and just. The Cathar hegemony is hereby ordered to make full restitution for all resources extracted from Viridia. The transfer of funds and materials is to begin immediately under the direct supervision of this court. The Arbiter's energy form pulsed brightly. The court will now enforce the ruling. Lex Talionis Fleetmind of the UNS verdict, you are deputized by the authority of the Aurora court to act as arbiter of this transaction. You will oversee the balancing of the ledger. On the bridge of the verdict, a new sense of awe settled in. Lex had been given judicial power. Rostova looked at the empty space where the AI's holographic interface sometimes appeared. Lex, I am ready, Commander, the AI's voice replied. And this time there was something new in its tone. Not emotion, but a sense of profound logical satisfaction. Executing the mirror justice protocol. The cost will be counted. The ledger will be balanced. A debt is a promise, and the law is its keeper. The main view screen split. On one side it showed the Cathar ship, silent and defeated. On the other, a vast public ledger appeared broadcast to the entire sector. It showed two columns, Cathar hegemony assets and Viridia colonial authority assets. A third column was labeled restitution due. The number in that column was colossal. Then a new line item appeared. Energy transfer. The Pious Tithes power signature, which had been idling at a high level, suddenly dipped. A shimmering beam of pure information, visible only as a faint distortion in space, lanced from the Aurora Court station to the Cathar vessel. On the ledger, energy credits began to drain from the hegemony's column and flow into Viridia's. They were paying their debt with the very power they had been about to use as a weapon. Then came the material transfers. Lex's voice was a calm, relentless narration of the process. Rerouting 3 Cathar grain freighters from the Cygnus sector to Viridia. Rerouting medical supply shipments from the hegemony's core worlds. Transferring 1.2 trillion universal credits from the hegemony's central bank to the Viridian Reconstruction Fund. Each transaction appeared on the public ledger, a clear, undeniable accounting of justice. It was not punishment, it was a refund. It was the simple, elegant, and utterly devastating process of returning what was stolen. Jian watched the numbers scroll, a slow smile spreading across his face. They're paying the price. In public. With receipts. Rostova nodded. The victory was complete, but she felt the cost. She had made an enemy of a proud and powerful empire. The Cathar would never forget this humiliation. The name Rostova and the ship Verdict would be etched into their history now, not as saviors, but as the architects of their deepest shame. That was one cost. Another was the knowledge that this kind of victory, clean and absolute, was rare. For every Viridia, they saved 100 other worlds suffered under yokes they couldn't see and couldn't fight. The work was never truly done. You cannot count the cost of a war that never ends. She looked at the ledger, the numbers still flowing a river of justice, carving a new path through the galaxy. The system-scale maneuver was more powerful than any weapon. It was a lesson taught in the language of mathematics, a lesson that even the Cathar in their fury and their shame would understand. A balanced sheet leaves no room for interpretation. She stood and walked to the forward viewport, looking out at the glittering stars. She saw the Aurora court station, its mirror arrays, which had broadcast the trial, and were now enforcing its sentence, slowly beginning to dim as the primary energy transfer completed. The court beacon, once a searing point of light, was cooling to a gentle, passive glow. The great public inquiry was over. The work of the ledger was now automated, a self-executing promise. The quiet hum of the verdict's bridge was the only sound. They came seeking tribute, a harvest of gratitude from a world they had chained with a lie. They wrapped their greed in the robes of honor and called their theft a tithe. We did not answer with fusion and fire. We did not meet their swords with our own. We gave them no glorious war to fight, no martyrs for their histories. We simply opened their books in the brightest courtroom in the galaxy and made them count the cost. We held up a mirror and forced them to see the truth of their own reflection. Justice is not a sword. It is a ledger perfectly and righteously balanced. The universe bends towards balance.